All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode. That's right, of the London is Blue podcast. Hopefully your favorite Chelsea podcast out there and a part of the Men in Blazers Media Network. Dan, one of your hosts here, and we are back. It is now 2025. Chelsea have an opportunity to turn the corner, flip the page, and rewrite the script from the last run of Premier League fixtures, 2 consecutive losses, and start 2025 off with a big dub against Crystal Palace and a trip to Selhurst Park. We are going to get into all the nitty-gritty in our match preview. And of course, if it's a match preview, you know our good friend Sam, CFC Central, is locked in as well. We don't have any New Year's hangover here. We are ready to get stuck in and talk about this match. But first, and of course, welcome back, Sam, and happy 2025 to you.
Oh, well, first of all, a very happy new year from us to everybody listening. Hopefully it'll bring, everybody here as well as the Chelsea fraternity a lot to smile about in the coming year. But I am, I'm a little worried. I'm not going to lie. It always is a big test of a team's resilience, a team's mental makeup, how well you can bounce back from adversity. And obviously, we've hit our first rough patch. And sometimes when you get in that rut, it's hard to sort of slip out of it. And we've seen this with Chelsea teams in the past. We compete very well with the bigger teams and the teams that we're sort of afraid of traditionally, and then you come up against the sides that you're absolutely supposed to hammer and be flat track bully against, but doesn't really come off. And I think that's been the issue in the last couple of games. We're now up against the side that has the most draws in the Premier League with 8 this season. So it is going to be a tense affair. A back five also coming up. So definitely a big test of how we can respond and if we can sort of turn it around in the new year and start it off right.
And I mean, if we think back to it, this is a reverse fixture for us. One of the first couple that we're getting into now in the second half of the season, fully underway. We see this Chelsea team, was cruising, I think, almost to a pretty clear 1-0 victory at Stamford Bridge back in the 1st of September. Nico Jackson with the 25th minute goal, and then Eze in the 53rd minute. I mean, there were only 3 shots on target for Palace in that game, but they end up getting it done by having just enough grift and enough graft to push themselves over the line. And one of those 8 draws were unfortunately against Chelsea. So we were robbed of 2 points on that day. So big opportunity for the team here to rebound. And I think as we get into this podcast, we want to take a look at where Crystal Palace right now. Is there any changes or things we have to be concerned about from the perspective there? And maybe some of the concerns we might have, particularly as the injuries start to accumulate for this Chelsea team, causing a little bit of concern there. We talk about if there's been any changes to the style of play or new weaknesses that have cropped up since the last time we faced Crystal Palace. And then we'll get into the issues Maresca has to solve for this one, and might be quite a number of them to address at this point, given 2 consecutive losses in the Premier League in a row. And we'll make some final predictions at the end of it all. Just a reminder off the top, if you haven't left a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, we'd always appreciate that. It's a good New Year's resolution for you if you haven't done it already. You also can subscribe on YouTube as well, like and comment on the videos. And hey, hit that bell icon to get notified when we drop a new video as well. You can also sign up our Discord to join in on the conversation in either free or paid capacity. And you can sign up for Sam's weekly newsletter, the London is Blue Dispatch, that we put out every single week. Just gets right there in your inbox, delivered, free, easy, no problem. And links in the description for information about our trip to London. Look, it's in 2025 now, so it's coming up way quicker than it was the last month when we talked about it. So we do have a fair number of spots left, but they are filling up. So if you are interested, don't forget to email us, reach out on any of the social platforms. We'd love to get you some answers, connect with our friends at XL Tours, and hey, get you on the tour with us. I mean, we're already in double digits of people who've joined up, and we'd love to see you there too. But Sam, is Crystal Palace 15th in the Premier League? Is this where you thought they would be? Based upon the summer they had, based upon how we felt that first fixture against us went on the 1st of September? Or do you feel like they're kind of a side that's maybe underperforming where they should be?
I think they finished last season on quite a high. The new manager coming in, great new manager bounce. A lot of negativity after Hodgson sort of implied that they were going to use lots of negative tactics and be defensively stable. And then by the end of it, they were beating teams for fun. But in the summer, when you lose a key player like Michael Olise, then you definitely got problems on your hands because A, you're not going to have enough money to replace him. And B, then there's a lot of other issues in terms of how well you can operate in the market. And they made, like, I would say, a couple of very smart buys, and both of them have like stood out so far. So Ismail Assar is somebody who's come in and looks stellar. He obviously has had a couple of seasons in the Premier League with Watford, and that did show that he had a lot of PL pedigree in that sense. And Maxis Lacroix has come in as a centre back in the back three, and he marshalled the central defense very, very well. So they've sort of had a mixed season in that sense, but yeah, a lot more draws than they would like. I think for a team that relies on a back three, they definitely want to prioritize a lot of solidity, but it's just been not enough to bring 3 points home. So probably not where they should be, but still a nuisance of a team to come up against. You don't want to come up against a side that draws consistently, and not even like 0-0 draws. It's like 1-1, 2-2, a red card here, or it's a pretty tricky team to come up against. So definitely going to pose its own set of issues.
Yeah, and some of those draws have also come against teams where we would consider them to be the types of teams that Chelsea feel like are in their neighborhood, at least this season. I mean, there was the 2-2 draw against Man City back in the 7th of December, and that was one. Maybe on the opposite side of those, it was the 2-2 draw against Wolves. I mean, they only lost 1-0 to Liverpool. That's not something every team can say. But also on the inverse, they've had some really bad looking, I think even ugly losses. I mean, losing 5-1 to Arsenal just before Christmas. I mean, that was a bad one. But then you flip it again and they won 3-1 over Brighton, who generally have had some pretty strong performances this season. They beat Tottenham 1-0. Like, it feels very much like this is a side where even as we're heading into this match, recording this preview, we're going to talk about a couple of things. I don't know who this team is. Like, I feel like the identity, you have a list of things here that we're going to talk about in terms of how they play. Is it just down to maybe execution, that they don't execute on the plan or the philosophy the right way? Or is it the players aren't capable of bringing that to life? Because it feels like you get a little bit of a different side every time they roll out.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I do feel like they have a set of identity in terms of like how they want to play and how they want to execute tactical instructions. But again, there are certain nitty gritties of it which haven't really come together. So if you just want to talk about the style of play, it's very consistent. They've stuck with a back three, a 3-4-3 or a 3-4-2-1, however it is that you would like to interpret it. And it goes into a 3-2-5 in possession. So they play pretty much like a Bundesliga side. There's a lot of space that they want to exploit for their quick attackers, but perhaps not as aggressive in the press. They sort of give you a little bit of an issue when you're trying to play out from goal kicks, but other than that, it's usually just the moment the first pass is made or the second pass is made to the wings, then they quickly retreat into a deeper position from where they will try to win the ball in central areas. We mentioned they have some very quick attackers. So Eberechi Eze and Ismail Assar are two guys who usually play behind the centre forward. And they've got a lot of freedom to either play in the half spaces or even move to the wings and essentially pick their positions and run at the defense. So they're going to basically wait for second balls. Palace go quite often long to just Mateta, who can knock down balls to these two guys and initiate some very quick transitions. And a lot of goals that they've scored against the high tier sides like Aston Villa or Brighton have come by exploiting that high line or by going sort of very quickly to players in pockets and pulling out players in the defensive line, then hitting the space in behind. So that's something that they enjoy doing, and especially a side like us that push our centre backs quite high. I think it's going to be a good test in terms of how we cope, especially when we don't have somebody like a West Fofana who's very good at retreating and tracking and making those last ditch challenges. So I think that's definitely something to watch. And Just to point out, Dan, Eze and Sar both have, Sar and Biteta both have 4 goals each, and that accounts for 50% of Crystal Palace's goals this season. So those
Oof.
two guys definitely have to be kept quiet. And we all know that in a back three where you've got wing backs and you want a little bit of initiative, the width usually comes from those two guys. So you've got Mitchell on the left hand side, who will bomb forward very consistently, and it allows those two guys in those attacking midfielder slots behind the centre forward to operate maybe closer together, also in the half spaces. So you'll see a lot of overlaps from Mitchell. On the right hand side, they've got Munoz, who's also a pretty strong defender. So a lot of bombing up and down, trying to sort of cross, and Eze will also try underlapping, and there will be balls played into the box for him to cut back. So quite dangerous in that regard for certain.
And then maybe in some of those other areas where there's just some points of note or maybe considerations, I mean, it does feel as if they're a team that really wants to enjoy soaking up pressure to turtle almost, and look for an opportunity to return the favor and attack on the bounce. I mean, that feels like something we should be expecting or looking out for. And then I think you mentioned it multiple times. Just, it is a team that knows how to draw. They might not know how to win a ton of games this season, but boy, oh boy, they know how to draw a game like nobody else.
No, absolutely. And I think a lot of it is just prioritizing a pretty adventurous out of possession shape. So they have a 5-2-3 that they go in high pressing, which is risky because you're leaving a lot of space in midfield, and you're expecting your back five to step up aggressively. So each one of those guys in the back line will step up into midfield to try and sort of stay with their man. So it is quite tough to execute because you don't want your defenders, man marking and pushing up. You want them settled. You want them in a position where they're able to anticipate and fall off whenever they want. But there's a lot of emphasis and initiative placed on them to make those decisions. And deeper in those positions, they will go into a 5-4-1, and that sort of works for them because they've got a big target man up front. So happy to just clear as much as possible. So just defensively, Dan, they're the most prolific tackling team in the Premier League, so the most amount of tackles attempted. And they're third for blocks and they're third for recovery. So it's a team that knows how to deal with second balls. It's a team that will crowd the box and make sure that you can't get your shots on target. And if they do, they're definitely going to try and block them as quickly as possible. So space will be a premium in positions where you want to keep sustained possessions, when you want to control the game. And you've got three centre backs, traditionally Trevor Chalobah, Mark Kehi, and Lacroix, who will sort of throw themselves around and make sure there's uh, a lot of tough stuff happening in and around. The second stuff that I want to say, Dan, is that very importantly, they are very strong at attacking set pieces. They've got 11 goals from open play, and they've got 8 from set pieces, which is second only to Arsenal in the league this season. So definitely going to be a good test in terms of set pieces. They're very good defensively as well. They've only conceded 3 goals all season. So will be a test from both attacking and defensive set pieces. If we can nick a goal in those situations, then it might just give us a very good advantage, and hopefully we'll be able to keep it.
All things that we hope for in that regard: improved play and plenty of positive performances we would certainly appreciate. But we're going to get our first ad break out of the way, and we'll get back. It's all about the weaknesses that we can expect to see in this Crystal Palace side. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, Sam, I didn't see it on the list here, but Mark Gahey, own goals is not on your list of weaknesses. And I feel like he's been directly responsible for some blushes this past season for Crystal Palace. But you do have a couple other things that maybe we want to point out as well, in terms of where Chelsea and Maresca and the players will look to exploit.
Yeah, he's a Goblin boy, so I'm very reluctant to criticize him. He's basically been involved in probably the most amount of own goals in the Premier League this season. Palace have conceded, I think, the second most own goals in the Premier League this season. So I don't know if it's luck, if it's just trying to be a little too crowded in the box where people take shots and it just goes off you. So one of the goals that I saw, a Gay's own goal, was just Henderson dropping the ball right at his feet. and a scramble sort of bouncing off him into the net. So that's just plain unlucky. But sometimes it sort of happens when you're trying to put bodies into the box. You know, the goalkeeper can't see. A lot of deflections happen where they end up in places that you can't control. So yeah, definitely one to keep an eye on. I mean, maybe that's part of your predictions. I don't know. You know, could be an ambitious one, a Mark Gahey own goal against
It
Chelsea.
would
It's
be out
happened
there.
at I
It
think.
would be out there, but as he's shown this season, it might not be the worst bet that we could make, or prediction that rather that we could
Mhm.
make in terms of one time it's an aberration, two times might be something there, three times, yeah, definitely something that you might want to pay note and pay attention to.
Pay attention to absolutely. But I think there are more advantageous positions in terms of definite things that we could look for payoffs. The first thing is that they are the poorest aerial team in the division, so only at 44%. And obviously, we've got advanced metrics like hops now in terms of how well the players compare. But yeah, there are certain metrics that you definitely look at and say, okay, there's something there. So the defensive line, in terms of an aerial perspective, you can look to exploit. I think Chalobah isn't as good as a lot of centre backs. I think Gehi, because of his height, because he's exceptional on the ground, but in the air you can give him trouble. Lacroix is quite good, and then you've got Mitchell, who's quite short as a fullback. So crosses to the far post, definitely worth exploiting. So aerially, you can give them an issue. There's also the fact that Henderson only tends to come for like 4%, 4.5% of his crosses in terms of a cross claiming perspective. To contextualize that, Sanchez is nearly thrice as much in terms of his cross claiming. So box control is definitely an issue, and you could see a lot of that crossing that we've seen in the past few games where Colwell steps up into the left half space and he tries to cross into the box, and you've got Noni and Neto making those really delicious in swinging crosses from the right hand side. So we might see more of that, but obviously, hopefully, you won't see Joao Felix at the end of them. The second one I'll probably say is that it's something that we've seen Maresca do tactically, and it's worked against a back three. And what he does is, instead of trying to harass the last line, what he does is he tries to overload the midfield line, because in both situations you've got, like, in a high press situation you've got a 5-2-3, and in a deeper situation you've got a 5-4-1. So instead of having six players in attack and trying to sort of force the initiative, what he does is he just gets three attacking midfielders against two central midfielders, and that causes a lot of issues. You've got three players who are constantly picking gaps, constantly picking little pockets, and then turning and running at the defense. And when you've got two central midfielders to take care of three tricky players like Cole Palmer, and a couple of others like Nico Jackson dropping, then you've got major issues. It's happened in the Conference League. It's worked very well. But the PL is a completely different beast altogether. But it does tactically really make a lot of difference. Brighton did it very well. You had Joao Pedro, who was dropping. You had a couple of other guys. Mitoma was drifting in from the left wing and sort of picking up positions. So you might see, in my opinion, maybe a Joao Felix or even an Nkunku starting from the left wing and coming inside to sort of dominate those two guys in Hughes and Jefferson Lerma in the defensive pivot. And the third point is quite related to it. So the defensive pivot is very ill disciplined. Both of them, between them, have 11 yellow cards. Lerma is on 7 and Hughes is on 4, or vice versa. But yeah, 11 yellow cards in there. So if you can get one of them on a yellow card quite early, and you're picking those little gaps and giving them issues, then you might be able to turn the tide in your favor in midfield, where one of the pivots just refuses to tackle. Lerma is also like a red card magnet, I think. So he's definitely one to keep an eye on. So yeah, that there is where I think you can sort of switch the balance. And the last one I'd probably say is, it's hard to be a high pressing side and sort of have a low defensive line, and the converse also holds true. It's difficult when you don't want to pressure the opposition, but you also want to hold a high line, and that's what Palace do. Like, they're not very super aggressive in the press, and they still want to keep their line high to try and pressure man to man, and make sure the defense are participating in man marking duties, and that's how you can get at them. I feel like if you can break the initial press, or if you can quickly go long to the quicker guys, at least on the flanks, then there's definitely a good chance that you can get in behind them. So a ball played in behind the high line, something that we did very well against Brighton. I think that could yield some very good dividends.
So, I mean, definitely a laundry list, it feels like, almost, of things that Maresca and the team can take advantage of, as we kind of maybe shift the conversation now to what Chelsea needs to do, and not being our own worst enemy, to converting our shots, to changing the formation. I mean, it feels like there's a lot of things heading into this match that fans are looking to see from Maresca, are looking to see from the team, particularly to rebound again as we beat it into the ground, beat it in the drum. The two consecutive Premier League losses against teams that you would argue on the day Chelsea should have done better against both of them. How much of that is you feel, or do you feel as if that is related to Maresca having less options available? Is it him being maybe more pragmatic in the squad management, or is it just coming down to, I think an argument I've seen a lot now is just maybe some fatigue that's existing within the players, kind of from a first half to second half performance for the team, and not using maybe the subs as well as he should. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that people are pointing to, but what's the diagnosis you're making, and what are you looking to see from Maresca in this match, both in the first and second half?
Yeah, I think there are a multitude of issues I have my finger on, and there were questions even before this run. I was very intrigued by and saying, let's see how Maresca sort of handles these when they come their way, and the festive fixture run obviously tells you an incredible amount about your team. I think fatigue and conditioning is definitely an issue, and again, I really wish I had data to go by and to give you like definite facts saying this is exactly how it is, but physical data is some of the hardest to come by for the Premier League. And I just say, Dan, last season, we all knew Pochettino sort of drilled players hard. We were in the preseason and we saw exactly how much physical work went into just making players absolutely ready for a high pressing, high intensity, lots of sprints kind of game. And obviously, it contributed to a lot of injuries and stuff. And now we're coming to a point in time where he doesn't have, the luxury of rotating all the 11 versus, a Ghent or a Panathinaikos. He has to be able to balance his sides, and he definitely has to get most of his 11 playing every 3 days. And I think we've seen a massive drop off from a conditioning perspective. I think we are seeing players tire faster. And we've got other issues also in terms of maybe like figuring out game management in general from Raska. So, um, can you afford to make certain tactical mistakes? I think Nick and you, both of you, talked about it in the post match pod last time around, saying, does the Sasi really need to be at right back? Do we really have to sort of, figure out Nkunku at 9, or is it just high time that we decide to keep him in his right position? And maybe like try Achimpong there. You've got him on a new contract. Maybe he's more suited and is aching for just that opportunity to prove himself. So a lot of like personnel issues, a lot of tactical issues, and I think it's a good thing to have maybe where you want certain challenges, you want to be tested, and hopefully Maresca is up to it. So fingers crossed. But a lot of questions then, and figuring them out definitely takes a lot more time than people sort of assume at first glance.
All right, Chelsea fans, it's editor Jake here to throw us to an ad break. It's my job to say thank you to the sponsors, and we will be right back.
And I know you usually like to take a couple of questions and throw them my way. What do you have for this one?
The first one is, I think, in the public debate already, but I'd love to have your opinion on this. So, do you think Maresca is guilty of not making subs or not making early subs, or are his substitutions letting him down? Like every time he puts somebody on, they're not giving him the effort that he needs. Noni was dropped for a technical decision. A lot of other players not being used at all. So, What's the read on this situation?
What I would say is, viewing the last couple of matches in particular, when you're making one sub or two subs and you have the opportunity to make up to five, when you have, when you start someone that's a center back by trade as a right back, you have multiple right back options on the bench. You don't go to any of those necessarily as the starting option. After you've seen that a player playing that right back role is not as comfortable, there are some questions I have around it. And, it would be very interesting if we could shift the conversation in the pre or post match press conferences to Maresca, away from title challenge, not title challenge, where Chelsea are at structurally, to talking about questions like, hey, you had three right backs available. You put Disasi in as a right back. What was the thought there? What was the value that he added versus playing Mallow or Josh or others? Like, you had an option to do that. Now, I think we all assume that Reece James is still working his way back into fitness. So maybe the three was a mirage, but even with two, it feels like you could have a question there and get an answer of some sort if you pressed a little bit. So I would love to learn a little bit more about why certain players versus other players. But it's also coming down to the starting lineup not achieving. I mean, there's not been many runs with Cole Palmer's time at Chelsea Football Club where he's gone multiple matches without goals and assists in terms of contribution. There's not been many times where Nico Jackson is in a position to, debatable. Maybe there have been positions last season where he was in a position to score and wasn't able to get it across the line. There's also times where someone like Nkunku is getting into a position and should have a surefire goal, and it gets knocked away. Like, as much as we point to the subs, in like our last match, we got into enough positions to score and win if we could be able to, if we can convert a little bit better than what we have been seeing. And so I do think there is a slump argument to point to and say that we are in a slump relative to what we are creating. I don't think we're creating as easy as we should. I think we're also giving up opportunities, but you are seeing the starting lineup not achieving, and then you're also seeing the subs not performing. And the question has not been asked. And so I think we operate with a little bit of a trying to read between the tea leaves here of, do we think it's the team is just completely bereft of ability and availability at the moment to force Maresca into a position where he doesn't feel comfortable trusting the players on the bench, when some of them have signed pretty extensive contracts to be here and to play for this club, that he doesn't trust the fitness of certain players to risk them at this point in the season, knowing that there's plenty of matches left to play. I don't think it's conclusive. So I think we're left to assume a little bit. And my assumption would be that we have players who are not necessarily as fit as they should be, which is causing us to not be able to sub as much as we want to. But it still feels as if there are players that, one or two positions that are continuing to let Maresca down. And it feels as if he's not yet made, I think, the tough call in some cases to bench a player who is repeatedly putting out bad performances in favor of others. And so I don't know what your thoughts are. It just feels a little odd. And it feels as if it's the first time we're seeing maybe a crisis of conscience from Maresca in terms of his words and his decisions in game and the results not necessarily be in sync with one another.
Yeah, I think that's an exceptional point in terms of just how certain positions where we've not been gifted or where injuries have come into play, we've not really been able to capitalize on in terms of a tactical perspective. What I'm about to say was actually like part of what I was working on for the newsletter, so maybe I'll expand on that point a little more fluidly when I write. But I do think everybody's like, a lot of the debate has sort of bypassed this altogether, but there's a particular position that has been, that has let down Maraska, or it's just like his sort of interpretation of the roles is just excluded a lot of those positions, and that's the number eight. I think every single number 8 that we have has either been frozen out or hasn't played. You see it in say, a Cesare Cassidy or a Keenan Dewsbury Hall or even a Carney Chukwuemeka. All those guys who essentially in a Maresca system are responsible for giving the 1v1 wingers a lot more freedom. None of those guys have basically made an impression. And what's that done is then it's placed a lot more emphasis on the guys that we do have, who are trying to sort of be bit part fits. So Enzo Fernandez, for example, is not somebody who can underlap, is not somebody who will get into those positions and offer cutbacks. Joao Felix, we saw in the last game, consistently just being static in those positions every time Kukureya was trying to push up. There was nothing whatsoever in terms of support. It was just trying to come inside the pocket, receive, and then play back. And that was very, very easy for Ipswich. I don't think we gave their fullbacks any issues whatsoever. So there is a number 8 crisis in there. I also think there is a crisis in terms of fullbacks. With Gusto's form, I think going up and down, Disasi playing on the right side, it's just far too predictable for Noni and Pedro to sort of like take on their man. They're getting doubled up every single time. So that's definitely going to be an issue going forward. If you don't have a marauding fullback, if you don't have number 8s, like what he did at Leicester, where they're causing consistent issues with underlaps, which I believe are some of the harder crosses to stop. Like the cutbacks are very, very dangerous. Then how exactly are you going to sort of maintain your supply line? And we have one goal in the Premier League in the last 3 games, which is quite uncharacteristic of a side that essentially was, the most potent side in the Premier League in terms of scoring goals. So that's fun for Maresca to figure out.
All right, what's your next question, Sam? Fire away.
Yeah, I think to start off 2025 in just the perfect spirits, we obviously had to have a question on the Jan window, and this is probably going to be pretty tough, but what do Chelsea need most urgently in January? Do they need a new fullback, a new centre forward, a new left back, or a new goalkeeper?
Ooh, that's a tough one for me because I think if you were to ask people, they would say we would take one of everyone. They would go to the buffet of options and say, yes, I would take a new goalkeeper. I would take a new center forward. I would go and add in multiple players. I just don't think, and maybe this is the wrong assumption, I don't think being in the top 4, being ahead of schedule by all extents and purposes of where this team we thought they would be at the beginning part of the season, with a new manager coming in during preseason, additional players coming in. I feel as if we are likely going to see 1 to 2 players come in this window, would be my assumption from like a numbers perspective. I think one of those is a purchase, and I think one of those is either a loan cancellation or a loan return, and the player ends up being a part of the squad. I mean, we know our Argentinian center back from Boca is coming as well. So like, I don't necessarily think he's the answer from a center back perspective just yet for our Chelsea team. Maybe he gets some minutes at some point in the competition, but maybe U21s, PL2 type of opportunities for him might be more likely or more in the cards for him than necessarily first team football. So if I was trying to place it, I think knowing that we can't necessarily trust Lavia's fitness, knowing that Enzo has had a great run of form, but that is over a 10-game stretch, and we need to hope that he can make it across the remainder of the rest of the season. And knowing that Moises Caicedo has not yet hit a slowdown, but we are dependent solely on him as midfield option number 1 and 2, and everybody else is 3, 4, and down the list. I wish we would bring back Andre Santos. I don't think it's going to happen. Like I know our good friend Nick is hoping and trying to will it into existence. I just don't think Blueco will necessarily sanction the move. Maybe they will. I would be pleasantly surprised that was the case. And then I would love to see a new true center back option coming into the club. And I think that is one where we know Axel Disasi isn't the answer. Benoit Bediashile gets injured again and is out. Wes Fofana is injured again. We need a very surefire thing there. Like we've not really had as much problem scoring as we've had keeping clean sheets and defending. And we have options from a right back perspective. We have Cucurella and whomever his backup is, and we don't necessarily have so many matches that you can't necessarily rotate in that position with someone like Vega as needed in some of the other competitions like the FA Cup or in the next round of the Conference League. I mean, because there's not a lot of top tier minutes in the Premier League left this season. So with all that said, I think two players come in. One's off of a loan return to the team for squad minutes, and you hopefully get one other impact player signing that can help push Chelsea across the line. I think it should be a midfield player as priority number one, given the issues there. You hope that with Wes Fofana, Badiashile, one of those comes back and is fit enough to be a capable center back if we can't get one or an upgrade option in the market this January. Your thoughts?
Bang on all counts, I think. But yeah, if I had to sort of focus, it would probably be on outgoings. I think there are a couple of frozen out squad members that we definitely need to move on in some capacity, and then essentially look at what options we have in the market. I think the easiest one, like you mentioned, is the fact that we are getting, um, you know, Andre Santos is somebody who's there, but do you want to bring him back prematurely and maybe ruin 6 more months of like consistent football at the top level is my question. So, in my opinion, no. I'd rather sort of like him have football day in day out at Liga and sort of finesse and polish those particular aspects of his game. So I'd probably leave him there. But I do agree that midfield depth is an issue. I think the most important part of it is like maybe a left back. I will definitely probably just be looking at some young left backs who are able to offer competition to Cuckoo. You don't want to sort of switch Malo Gusto in there. You don't want to um, you know play Disasi at right back and make those kind of situations happen. So maybe that's something that's on the plate with Vega probably not really trusted in that role in those positions. But it's again a very niche kind of position. You need a left back who's either a centre back or either a central midfielder. So that's definitely going to be tougher to use in terms of um, you know where do we find him? So Lewis Hall would have been incredible had we kept him, but yeah, unfortunately, I think it's just going to be having to go into the market again and find a niche position. So I think left back is definitely number one for me if you could go somewhere, and I do think that we have to start laying the groundwork for another center forward.
Sure.
Maybe just to complement Nico in some respects, or even the profiles that the SDs targeted, like John Duran or even a Samu, would have been absolutely phenomenal in these games. Or even if you don't get a center forward, at least like don't throw Nkunku on at nine, throw Marquis on, and maybe try and see if you can give him a lot of PL minutes. He's probably not ready, but he isn't going to be sitting on the bench. So maybe a little more of that, earlier subs and see what he can do.
All right, well, let's wrap it with a couple of just quick fire predictions. Look, I don't necessarily know if own goal is going to pop up again as a leading scorer in this fixture, though I do think that was a fun suggestion you made earlier, Sam. Do you have a off the wall projection for this game, or maybe what do you think? Win, loss, draw for Chelsea? Do we break the loss? Do we settle for one of those, the ninth draw for Crystal Palace, or are we able to find our form and return to our winning ways?
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a squeaky bum kind of game where it's a lot more narrower than we think. But yeah, could be a score draw or a narrow win for us. I'll probably go narrow win because I am an optimist as always. But wouldn't be surprised if it's a score draw. In terms of maybe making sort of ambitious predictions, I'd probably say like. If Palace have like less than 20 box touches, then they're definitely losing.
Mm,
So if you can keep them away from the box, then I think there's definitely something in there, and I also predict that Ismail Assar will either have a goal or an assist. So
Oh,
those are my predictions, but I would love to hear yours.
oh man, I would love any type of win. Ugly win, pretty win, just absolutely stomping the foot on the ground type of win. I would take anything in this one. I think to your point though, tighter margin in this one. Win whatever way, shape, or form possible. I think it's a 1-0 win. And I think it's like something dumb where it's not necessarily an own goal, but maybe it's a penalty situation. Cole Palmer gets back on the score sheet, not through an open play goal, but through a penalty. And Chelsea win 1-0 to start 2025 in the Premier League with 3 points in their trip to Selhurst Park. But that's where I'm going.
It sounds good. I think that's a fair prediction to make, and you won't see me complaining about a clean sheet to start off the year. I think that's something desperately needed. So may all your dreams come true, Dan.
Well, may all of our listeners' dreams come true. Hopefully, as they're all wishing for wins as well in the start of 2025 for Chelsea's return to Premier League action. That's going to do it for this episode and this match preview. We'll be back with a match review next week and the start of some wonderful Matt Law pods this month as we get into the transfer window in full force. Match previews, match reviews, and everything coming your way on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on YouTube as well, wherever you get your podcasts. So don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, hit the bell icon to get notified, sign up to our free weekly newsletter, join in the conversation in Discord in a free or paid capacity, and don't forget you can still join in on our London trip coming up this March and April. So get involved with that. Links in the description. But until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.